Welcome to another deep dive, and this one is going to take us way beyond the usual cannabis headlines.
Yeah.
We're not just going to be talking about like legalization or medical marijuana.
Right.
Today,
Yeah.
we're going to explore cannabis as like this lens, this unique lens to understand these broader themes.
Yeah.
Like things like equality and access to healthcare, and even what it means to be human, to be conscious.
Absolutely. It's really about how these different areas connect with each other. So we've got the hard science of cannabis, but we also have the culture surrounding it,
Right.
and then how those things shape how we see ourselves in the world around us.
Yeah, and we've got a really cool mix of sources to help us do that. So we're talking like academic articles about how THC works in our brains, reflections on cannabis culture all the way from Amsterdam,
Oh, wow.
explorations of cannabis as a potential treatment for PTSD,
Interesting.
even philosophical dives into personal freedom and equality.
Yes, a lot to cover.
It's a lot, but our mission today is to pull out the most fascinating, like the often overlooked aspects of all this information.
Right.
So we're going to unpack the science, we're going to look at the potential for healing, and we're even going to dive into those complex ethical discussions that come up.
Exactly.
All right, I want to start with something that really caught my eye when I was looking through the research, this concept of EME.
Oh, interesting.
So obviously it's playing off of the famous EMC equation,
Right.
but it's not your typical physics.
Not at all.
It's more about the mind.
So this is actually a framework developed by Dr. Shelley D. Chuchmuch, who's really a leading voice in this field.
Okay.
And the idea here is to really emphasize that mind-body connection, almost like bridging mind science with quantum principles.
So instead of EMC, where it's all about energy and mass, this EME is saying the mind is really central.
Yeah, you got it. So the M represents the mind's energy, and then the E represents how both emotions and the environment have this impact on well-being. So it's not just what's going on internally, but it's also those external factors.
Right.
What's really fascinating is that Dr. Chuchmuch uses this model to explore how cannabis can actually interact with our consciousness.
See, that's what I thought was so cool, because it suggests that compounds like THC and CBD, they might not just be treating symptoms on a surface level.
Yeah.
They might be working with the brain's ability to change and adapt.
Right.
It's called neuroplasticity.
Yes.
So the effect could be much deeper and longer lasting than just, taking something to feel better temporarily.
Think of it like this.
Okay.
You're using cannabis not just to mask the anxiety, but to actually rewire those pathways in your brain that are associated with stress.
Okay.
Leading to like a more lasting and profound sense of calm.
Oh, I like that. That makes a lot of sense.
So it's really about working with the brain's natural ability to heal.
It gets even a little wilder, though, right? Because Dr. Chuchmuch also talks about space-time atomic T,
Right.
which is this whole other...
It's a big one.
Yeah, it's a whole other idea.
And this idea is rooted in the concept of veritas,
Okay.
which is all about seeking this deeper truth and meaning through a holistic approach.
Okay.
And with space-time atomic T, Dr. Chuchmuch is basically suggesting that our experience of time isn't fixed and linear,
Right.
but it's dynamic, and it can be influenced by our intentions and by our consciousness.
So like our minds are playing a role in how we experience time.
Yeah, it's like saying our minds can have a role in shaping how we perceive the flow of time itself.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that one is going to take a little more pondering for sure.
Definitely a head scratcher.
But for now, I want to shift gears a bit and get into the more practical side of things.
Okay, sounds good.
So let's talk about THC. Like, what is it actually doing in our bodies?
So THC works by interacting with the system in our bodies called the endocannabinoid system,
Okay, yeah.
or the ECS for short.
Yeah.
And this system is super important. It
Right.
regulates so many things: mood, pain, inflammation, even sleep. You can almost think of the ECS like the conductor of an orchestra.
Okay.
It's there to make sure that all the different instruments are in sync
I like that.
and the music flows smoothly.
Okay, that's a good analogy.
Yeah,
So it's about more than just like the high that people associate with THC.
way more.
Yeah.
Researchers have found that THC has the potential to treat a wide range of conditions.
Like what?
So we're talking about chronic pain,
Oh,
things like neuropathy, arthritis, cancer-related pain.
wow. And what about neurological disorders?
Yeah, so there's evidence that THC could be helpful for things like epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, and even Parkinson's disease.
I've also heard a lot about THC being studied for mental health conditions.
Absolutely. And early research is showing promise for conditions like anxiety, depression, even PTSD.
Wow.
And one theory is that THC might actually help stabilize the levels of serotonin and dopamine in the brain,
Oh, interesting.
which are these key neurotransmitters that are involved in regulating our mood.
It's pretty amazing when you think about all the potential that this plant has, especially considering how demonized it's been for so long.
It really is a shift in how we see it, and there's a growing awareness of these possibilities.
Yeah.
But it's also important to keep in mind that research is still ongoing. We have a
Wow.
lot to learn about cannabis and its complexities.
Speaking of complexities, I want to move into how people are actually using cannabis these days.
Okay.
Because it's not just about rolling a joint anymore, is it?
No, not at all, especially for people using it for medical reasons.
Right.
There's been this big move towards alternative methods that offer more control and precision.
Oh, that makes sense. So what are some examples?
Well, edibles are one.
Okay.
We're talking brownies, gummies, even beverages infused with cannabis.
Okay.
And they tend to provide a longer lasting effect
Okay.
compared to smoking or vaping, which can be helpful for people dealing with chronic pain.
Right. Okay.
But you do have to be mindful of the delayed onset.
What does that mean?
So it takes a bit longer for the effects to kick in,
Oh.
and it's easy to accidentally take too much if you're not careful.
Okay. What about tinctures? I've heard that those are good for people who want a very specific dose.
Yeah, tinctures are great for that. They're like
Uh-huh.
concentrated cannabis extracts, and you take them orally, often by placing a few drops under your tongue, which leads to faster absorption.
Okay.
They're discreet and offer a lot of control, which is why they're popular with medical users.
Okay. And there are topicals, right?
Yes.
Those are more for like pain that's in a specific area of the body.
Exactly. So topicals are things like creams, lotions, balms that are infused with cannabis,
Okay.
and you apply them directly to the skin.
Okay.
They're often used for muscle soreness, joint pain, even some skin conditions.
Interesting.
And because they don't enter the bloodstream, they don't have those psychoactive effects.
Oh, okay.
They just provide that targeted relief.
So we've got edibles for longer lasting effects, tinctures for precise dosing, and topicals for that targeted relief.
Mm-hmm.
What about vaping? Is that still a common method?
Vaping's still pretty popular.
Yeah.
It's often seen as kind of a middle ground between smoking and edibles.
Okay.
It's faster onset than edibles, but not as harsh on the lungs as smoking.
Right.
And there are tons of devices and options these days.
Oh, wow.
So people can really choose what works best for them.
So there's really a whole world of choices when it comes to cannabis consumption these days.
Absolutely.
And this actually connects to something that Dr. Chechmuch is really passionate about, right? This idea that patients should have the right to choose how they consume cannabis.
Right. It's all about patient autonomy
Okay.
and the right to choose the method that best suits their individual needs.
I like that. It seems very empowering.
It is. And this gets into this larger conversation about freedom and healthcare equity,
Okay.
which we'll definitely be diving into deeper a little later.
Well, that's actually a great segue to our next topic then. This intersection of cannabis, equality, and equity.
Yeah, this is where things get a little more complex.
Definitely, because the legal landscape surrounding cannabis is still evolving so much.
Right.
And there are huge inconsistencies in how it's regulated and how it's accessed, both within countries and between them.
Huge inconsistencies.
And that creates some real challenges, especially for people who are relying on cannabis for medical reasons.
Absolutely.
Can you imagine? You found relief from like a debilitating condition thanks to cannabis.
Right.
But then if you travel across a border,
Right.
you're suddenly facing these legal barriers.
It's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah. And it's a shame because it really highlights these limitations on access to healthcare.
Exactly.
And we're talking about something that's actually improving people's quality of life.
It's a real issue. And Dr. Chechmuch actually draws comparisons to some really landmark legal cases.
Like what?
Things like Roe v. Wade and Brown v. Board of Education.
And these cases really show us that there's this ongoing struggle for equal access to healthcare.
No matter what treatment we're talking about.
Exactly. So it's bigger than just cannabis.
It's a fundamental issue.
And it's interesting how this conversation about cannabis is weaving its way into these bigger discussions about freedom and personal choice.
It really is.
And it makes me think that access to healthcare, including things like cannabis-based treatments, it should be a human right.
Absolutely.
It shouldn't be dictated by where you live or what the political climate is.
Agreed.
So we've talked about how cannabis can impact our consciousness. We've looked at its potential for healing.
Yeah.
And we started to touch on these complexities of navigating a world where the rules are constantly changing.
Right. It's a moving target.
Now, I want to shift gears a bit and get into the more personal and introspective side of cannabis use.
Okay, I like that.
Because Dr. Chuchmuch has reflected on her own experiences with cannabis
Yeah.
and how it's contributed to her personal growth.
So she talks about how cannabis can be this tool for introspection and self-discovery,
Right.
allowing people to connect with themselves and their creativity in ways they might not have before.
I think that's so important because for so long, the narrative around cannabis was that it made people lazy and unmotivated.
Right, the stereotype.
Yeah, but now we're starting to see how it can actually help people tap into their potential.
Absolutely. It's a total reframing of that old story.
Yeah, and for Dr. Chuchmuch, she actually describes feeling more liberated and authentic through her own journey with cannabis.
Interesting.
And it wasn't just about using it.
Right.
She also got really into growing it.
She did.
Oh, yeah. She talks about experimenting with growing cannabis in all sorts of different environments.
I can imagine.
From like small closets to larger outdoor farms.
Oh,
She even played around with hydroponic and aquaponic systems.
that's impressive.
Yeah. And that hands-on experience seems to have given her a much deeper understanding of the plant's resilience and its ability to adapt to different conditions.
Yeah, she really connects those qualities of the plant to the human capacity for growth and for transformation.
It's like, just as a cannabis plant reaches for the sunlight, we can also overcome challenges and flourish when we're given the right conditions.
Beautiful analogy.
So we've covered a lot of ground already,
we had.
from consciousness and space-time
Right.
to the practicalities of THC and how people are using cannabis these days.
It's been a good overview.
But there's still so much more to explore.
Definitely.
So as we move into the second part of this deep dive, we're going to keep unpacking these themes, and we'll get into those cultural, social, and philosophical implications of cannabis use even deeper.
Sounds good.
But before we do that, I want to leave our listeners with a thought to ponder.
Okay. I like it.
If cannabis can challenge how we understand time, consciousness,
Right.
even our legal systems,
Yeah.
what other possibilities might it hold for shaping our future?
Ooh, I like that.
What could the impact look like in the next decade, in the next century?
That's a great question to leave them with.
Because this isn't just about getting high or finding relief from pain.
Right.
It's really about expanding our understanding of what it means to be human.
I love that.
Now, as we move into part two,
Yeah.
I want to shift our focus to this world of cannabis distillation and concentration.
Oh, interesting.
Because one of our sources compares and contrasts how you make cannabis concentrates with how you make wine.
Wow.
And there are some really surprising parallels.
Oh.
Now, I know a little bit about winemaking,
Okay.
but I'm really curious to learn how cannabis distillation fits into the picture.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
So let's dive in. So I've always been fascinated by this whole idea of turning raw ingredients into something like totally different.
Yeah.
Something that's refined and, really potent.
Right.
And when I think about it, both winemaking and cannabis extraction kind of have that, that element of transformation.
It is like alchemy. Both industries are rooted in this tradition of taking these natural materials and creating something new.
So are you saying there are like actual parallels between how you make wine from grapes and how you extract concentrates from cannabis?
There are. Yeah, it's all about like timing and, really controlling these chemical processes
Okay,
and
great.
understanding the materials that you're working with.
So walk me through some of the similarities in like the actual steps involved.
Okay, so let's start with wine.
Okay.
It all begins with harvesting the grapes, right?
Right.
At just the right time.
When they're perfectly ripe.
Exactly.
Right.
And then comes the crushing and the fermentation, where yeast converts the sugars in the grapes into alcohol.
Okay, and then there's that aging process, right?
Yeah, so that's where the wine really develops its flavors and aromas.
Yeah, in those oak barrels.
Exactly, whether it's oak barrels or stainless steel tanks.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, after all of that, the wine is bottled and labeled, and it's ready to be enjoyed.
Ready to go. So how does cannabis distillation kind of mirror those steps?
Well, it all starts with the cultivation of the plant, right?
Okay.
It's just like the soil and the climate of a vineyard influence the grapes.
Right.
The environment where cannabis is grown really has a big impact on the final product.
So it's not just about the strain of cannabis, it's like the whole environment that goes into it.
It's everything, yeah.
Okay.
And then comes the harvesting and drying of the buds.
Okay.
Which you could compare to that fermentation stage in winemaking.
Okay.
That's where the plant's chemical composition continues to evolve
Interesting.
and its essential oils are preserved.
So we've got like the raw materials and that initial processing. What's next?
Then comes the extraction.
Okay.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
So cannabis concentrates, they're made using different methods like CO2 extraction or ethanol extraction.
And these methods are kind of like the distillation process in winemaking.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's all about isolating and concentrating those specific compounds that you're looking for.
Whether it's THC or CBD.
Exactly. Or those aromatic compounds called terpenes,
Oh, right.
which give cannabis its unique flavor and effects.
So we're talking about those oils and waxes and shatters and the really potent distillates.
You got it.
Okay.
And just like wine can go through further refinement,
With aging.
right, cannabis concentrates can go through additional purification processes to remove impurities and boost potency.
It's amazing how much science and technology goes into creating these products.
It really is a blend of ancient knowledge and modern innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And what's exciting is that this focus on distillation and concentration is opening up the possibility of creating incredibly precise and targeted cannabis products.
Especially for medical use, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So instead of just smoking a joint and kind of hoping for the best,
Right.
people can actually choose products that are designed to help with their specific needs.
It's all about personalization and effectiveness.
And this brings us to this concept of craft cannabis
Oh.
that I've been hearing a lot about.
Yeah, so it's similar to the craft beer movement or artisanal wine.
Right.
You have these small batch producers that really prioritize quality, consistency, and a deep understanding of the plant.
So it's like not just about getting high anymore. It's about appreciating the subtleties of the plant
Exactly.
and creating those unique experiences.
And for medical users, this
Yeah.
is especially important because they rely on these products to really manage their symptoms.
It's like the difference between grabbing a beer from the grocery store
Right.
and like savoring a microbrew.
Exactly. It's about elevating the experience
Okay.
from how it's grown to how it's consumed.
I like it. And it's about giving people the knowledge to make informed choices.
Absolutely.
This takes us back to patient rights and healthcare equity,
It all connects.
because it's important that people have access to a range of products and consumption methods.
Right, so they can find what works for them.
And they need the information to make those choices.
Education is key.
Now, one of the sources we dug into explores this concept of cannabis stress
Interesting.
and how it might relate to the human experience.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating concept.
So we usually think of stress as a negative thing,
Right.
but for plants, stress can actually be a catalyst for growth and survival.
It is true.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. So one of the coolest things about cannabis is its ability to change sex under stress.
Wait, what?
Yeah, so typically cannabis plants are dioecious,
Okay.
meaning they have separate male and female plants.
Right.
But under certain conditions, a female plant can start producing male flowers.
So it's like changing its reproductive strategy to survive.
Exactly. It's called hermaphroditism.
Oh.
And it's basically a survival mechanism that allows the plant to reproduce even when conditions are tough.
Wow, it's literally changing its sex to survive.
It is.
Are there other ways that it responds to stress?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like what?
So cannabis plants can exhibit changes in their growth patterns, the
Okay.
chemical composition,
Mm-hmm.
even their resistance to pests and diseases.
Wow, plants are so adaptable.
They are, and the source we're looking at suggests that this adaptability in the face of stress might have some lessons for us as humans.
Okay, so how does this cannabis stress relate to our own experiences?
Well, just like cannabis plants, we're exposed to stressors all the time.
Right.
Work deadlines,
Relationship issues,
Yeah.
traffic.
all of
You have to
them.
adapt to all of that.
Right, and the source draws a parallel between the concept of bully climates in the plant world
Okay.
and the kinds of negative social or environmental pressures that we experience as humans.
So, like, a cannabis plant struggling to grow in a really crowded field is similar to us being bombarded with negativity.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of creating supportive and nurturing environments
For both plants and people.
for everyone.
I like it. It makes you think about how your surroundings really impact you.
They do, and the source actually mentions this really interesting experiment with IKEA plants.
IKEA plants.
Yeah.
Okay, what is that?
So researchers wanted to see how plants would respond to different types of environments.
Okay.
So they compared plants that were exposed to negativity,
Like what kind of negativity?
like bullying or harsh words.
Wow. Okay.
And then they compared them to plants that were in a positive environment.
Interesting. So what happened?
The plants that were exposed to negativity, they didn't thrive.
Okay.
They showed stunted growth.
Mm.
The plants that were nurtured, they grew strong and healthy.
That's a powerful image.
It is.
It shows how much our words and actions really impact things.
Even plants.
It's a good reminder that we all have the power to create those positive spaces.
Or negative ones.
And this ties back into that conversation about social justice and equity.
It does.
Because if we want to create a more equitable world, we have to acknowledge those stressors that are impacting marginalized communities.
Absolutely. Things like poverty, discrimination, lack of access to health care.
Yeah.
These are all stressors that create those bully climates that make it so hard for people to thrive.
And it reminds me that true equality isn't just about legal rights.
Right.
It's about creating a society where everyone has an opportunity to reach their potential.
Free from those oppressive systems.
So how do we even begin to address these really complex issues?
It starts with awareness.
Okay.
Recognizing that these bully climates exist and understanding the impact that they have.
And then taking action.
Yeah, advocating for policies that promote justice.
Okay.
Supporting organizations that are working to empower communities. Even just being mindful of our own words and actions.
Creating that world where everyone can flourish.
Like those IKEA plants.
Exactly.
That were given kindness and care.
So as we move into the final part of this deep dive,
Okay.
we're going to look at some real-world examples of how this vision of equality and well-being is being put into action. I'm excited to see where this goes next.
Me too.
So we've talked about how cannabis interacts with our consciousness, about its potential for healing, and even the role of stress and resilience in both plants and people.
It's been quite a journey.
It has, and now I'm curious to hear about some of the people and initiatives that are really putting these ideas into action out there in the real world.
It's inspiring to see how people are using cannabis as this catalyst for change.
Yeah.
Not just for personal healing, but on a broader social and cultural level.
Yeah. One of the stories that really stuck with me from our research was Dr. Chichmuch's journey.
Oh, yeah. Her story is incredible.
Because her work goes beyond just the science. There's this beautiful intersection of art and healing that comes through.
She talks about arriving in Amsterdam.
Right.
And feeling this sense of liberation, like she had finally found a place where she could truly explore cannabis.
Without the stigma.
Without the stigma, without the limitations she'd encountered in other places.
And it wasn't just about the science for her.
No, it was much deeper than that.
Amsterdam opened her eyes to how cannabis can bring art, science, and healing together in this really unique way.
It's like cannabis became both her medicine and her muse.
Like that.
A tool for both personal growth and creative expression.
And her passion for growing cannabis plays a big role in her story too, right?
Absolutely. She talks about starting small, growing in closets, and then expanding to larger outdoor farms.
Wow.
Experimenting with different growing techniques like hydroponics and aquaponics.
And that hands-on experience seems to have given her this really deep appreciation for the plant.
Yeah, for its resilience, its adaptability.
Its ability to thrive in all these different conditions.
And she connects those qualities of the plant to the human capacity for growth and transformation.
Oh, that's cool.
It's a reminder that we can overcome challenges and find ways to flourish.
Even in those unexpected environments.
Exactly. It's about pushing those boundaries.
And her story is really about challenging the status quo, pushing for a world that's more just and equitable for everyone.
She's a real trailblazer.
And it shows how one person's passion and commitment can inspire others.
Create a ripple effect.
To think differently and make a difference.
It's powerful.
And it's not just individual stories like hers. We're seeing these changes at a systemic level too, right?
Absolutely. One of the sources talked about food and beverage equity in the cannabis space.
Okay, that's a new one for me. What does that mean?
It's about ensuring that everyone has access to safe and high-quality cannabis products.
Okay.
Regardless of their background or financial situation.
Especially with all these new ways of consuming cannabis.
Right, like edibles, beverages, and all the other options beyond smoking.
So making sure that everyone can benefit from cannabis no matter how they choose to consume it.
Exactly. It's about inclusivity.
But this idea of equity, it goes beyond just the products, doesn't it?
It does. It's also about who's benefiting economically from the growing cannabis industry.
Right, because there's a lot of money to be made.
There is, and there's a movement to make sure that those benefits are distributed fairly. Creating opportunities for small businesses, for entrepreneurs from communities that have been historically marginalized.
So using the cannabis industry as a tool for social change and economic empowerment.
That's the goal. Recognizing that the fight for equality in the cannabis space is part of this larger fight for social justice.
Because it's the same systems of oppression that have always been there.
Right.
Now they're showing up in the cannabis industry.
It's a pattern.
So just legalizing cannabis isn't enough.
We have to do more.
We have to be intentional about creating a just and equitable industry from the ground up.
Dismantle those systems.
And this brings us back to those core themes of freedom and personal choice.
Full circle.
It's about empowering individuals
To make their own choices.
advocate for themselves.
And to work towards a better world.
And it's about recognizing that freedom comes with responsibility.
Responsibility to use our voices and our actions.
To shape the world we want to live in.
That's powerful.
So to wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage everyone listening to keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep advocating for that future where cannabis is a force for positive change.
A future built on equality and compassion.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration.
Until next time, keep exploring.